Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mile High Sports Symposium. I am JT Matthews, your host, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Nicholas Manning, per usual. And we have a special guest today, and want to thank you for giving us your time. This is Drew Creasman. He is Rockies beat writer, video producer over with Mile High Sports. Just glad to have you. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Stoked to be on with you guys. Always love getting together with my friend, the good doctor.
The good old doctor. Well, we are thankful for that relationship, so we can get you on here. But just to talk sports and Rockies. We've been kind of beating the Broncos draft stuff into the ground, which I personally love, but we need a change of pace and we need some things to look forward to, relying on you to sell me on this Rocky season.
Oh no, is that what we're doing today? Oh goodness.
No, you know
I didn't
what?
really say that out front, but
let me set the table. The one reason why I did this last time Drew was on, but I remember back in the BSN sports days. So in 20, maybe it was like 2016, 2016. Kind of when the Rockies were really starting to be competitive again. Nolan coming up, Trevor, DJ, Charlie. And I remember listening to Drew, and it was just like found my love for baseball again. Yeah, I played baseball from Pee-wee to through high school. At 5'8", it's probably the sport I was physically best at. You know, it was just you versus baseball versus big, tall football. Anyway, but I loved it. And Drew's, and not only just the like intellect and knowledge of the game, which is tremendous. Hence why we're going to chat baseball today. But like that, and I wouldn't say it's like unbridled optimism. You know, it's not like he doesn't hold like Colorado Rockies water, you know, for like the organization, but it's like you can look at sports and be angry when your team doesn't play well or whatever, or like most of us want to, like, what's the joy about the game? And, you know, even though your team lost 100 games, it's also okay to like enjoy the sport and the team and the players on it. Right. And the way that Drew comes at it, like it makes me like enjoy the product or find the beauty within the game, even if your team isn't good. Right. And I think sometimes we see it a lot. We talked about why we kind of rebranded. And yesterday there's just so much negativity when your team doesn't play well, or a coach or a player. Like it is the fandom in the markets become volatile, and it gets like toxic. And, you know, in the end, sports is a escape. It's an opportunity to learn life lessons, to have common ground, like hang out with people that maybe you wouldn't normally even chat with. And it's kind of a unifier of all those things. Plus it's, you know, you get to watch people do superhuman stuff, and that's pretty dope. And so I've always appreciated like your outlook on it, Drew. And like, we could be Debbie Downers or Donald Downers, whatever, you know, you never know who. Or you can call it out like it is. Yep. Here's why they're not playing well. Here's the guys that aren't, but here's some things that you could look forward to and be excited about as a fan. So I've always appreciated that, Drew. That's why you are my favorite baseball / media member. Just you make me appreciate sports and like have it in context. And it's, you know, it's not your life. You know, no offense to everyone that's watching probably right now. None of us are going to go suit up tomorrow and play for the Rockies. So maybe the investment and what the outcome is, let's find a reason to enjoy stuff. So hats off to you again. You continue to do that. And it's very inspiring for me and allows me to, you know, let the responsibility of the team winning go, because I have no control over it. But also, like, I want to enjoy it. Like, I don't want to pick another team. I have batted that idea around. There are teams that I appreciate. But in the end, you know, like when you got your fandom, like I'm not going to give up. I'm a Rockies fan. I'm a Colorado born and bred. Like, nope, it's my team. And you know what? I'm going to keep rooting for them no matter what. And I want to enjoy and, you know, give the players on the team some like they're not writing the checks. You know, they didn't hire the GM. They're going out there kicking their butt, you know, time away from their families and all that stuff. So I appreciate you, and so glad that you're on, because I'm actually excited for the Rocky season, and not like hope, spring brings hope and hope there's eternal optimism. Like to start out, like everyone's 0-0, not even like that kind of dumb. Like a Dodger $370 million payroll.
Goodness gracious.
But you know what? It's the first time, long time, that I can see a plan really since the kind of Nolan wave. Hence your last article, but we'll get there in a second. And you can project and say, hey, you know what? There's some dudes or potential dudes, and you can see what they're building. We talked about it. JT and I talked about it a lot. Like last year for the Broncos was the first year you could see the plan in motion in a long time. So not only just the fact of whether or not they were winning, but like we can see what they're laying out, and we can see how it's in motion now. And for the Rockies, I don't think it's that far along necessarily, but it gives you, I think, me a little bit more hope and confidence that we'll see some good baseball at Coors Field soon. And because I can see the plan playing out. I can see the young players coming in, some of the younger players becoming vets, and then, hopefully in all totality. So I'm actually really excited about the season. I think that there's some really quality stories to be had. So first and foremost, the Rockies are killing it in the spring.
Yeah.
Which usually translates to World Series titles and dynasties.
Right,
what do you make of just the other day when they played the Dodgers, shutout 2-0, I think they brought their A lineup. And I think there's some intention with that. And so maybe just what's your take so far on how the spring has looked? The team overall has been competitive. And so what's your overall little take just from the spring?
Well, first of all, thank you for that incredibly kind intro. That was very nice. And I hope I don't disappoint the people. Like that's a lot of hype to live up to, but that's fine. We'll do all right. But yeah, no, you're 100% right that the outcomes of the games, even a lot of times the specific statistics, you can't get too carried away with, especially early in spring training. And we're still pretty early in spring training. That said, you go into every spring, and like you said, it's that plan thing. You're looking at certain key players. With most veterans, with say a guy, and now Chris Bryant's a different category we put in there, but a guy like they brought in like Tyro Estrada. You're like, Tyro Estrada is just going to be Tyro Estrada. There's nothing. I am not watching him play baseball this spring. I'm sorry, I'm not. I know exactly who he is, what he can do, what he will do, and we're fine. In the last several years that Charlie Blackmon and Nolan Arenado and those guys were around, I didn't watch them in spring. Sometimes people would be like, hey, do you notice Charlie went 1 for 18 in spring training? I'd be like, no, I didn't notice that. And I'll bet you Charlie didn't either.
Yeah.
But every year, and especially this year, you come in looking at young players who either have a little bit of big league experience and are trying to now become regulars and kind of cement themselves into opening day positions. That's Jordan Beck right now, a guy who's been a top prospect for the Rockies, has shown a ton of promise, came up early. They were really aggressive with him. He did some very interesting things at the big league level, and then he got hurt, and he came back and not so great. But he's so young, you're like, this is a big spring training for him. So he comes out, he's looked good, right? And then you have those other guys, and almost everybody in this category is balling out, which is why this is such an interesting spring training so far.
Yeah,
is those guys who haven't made their big league debut yet. A couple of guys who we thought maybe would last year, but injury or circumstances prevented: Zach Veen, Yanquiel Fernandez, a couple of these other guys. And now Benny Montgomery has jumped himself up into the conversation. All outfielders there. And we can talk about pitching in a minute because there's plenty there too. But you've got these guys knocking on the door. And, in your mind, you go, it'd be great if Zach Veen had a phenomenal spring training. But if not, he's almost certainly going to AAA anyway. Again, Jordan Beck's the guy kind of winning the job. But he shows up and he is just hitting the ball over the wall into the gap. He's taking second base on the stuff that like takes away from guys. Like he's just playing. Now Zach Veen always plays like his pants are on fire, and I love it. So right on. But yeah, those are the kinds of guys like Fernandez is playing really, really well. But these other kind of I guess what you would call fringy top 10 prospects, or guys who haven't gotten as much national love as prospects, but have been really intriguing and last year put up phenomenal numbers in the Rockies system. Kyle Karros, son of Eric Karros of Dodgers fame. You've got Cole Carrig, who's a guy who plays literally every position on the diamond. Now, normally when you say that, you go, yeah, but not catcher. So that too. He can catch and play center field. And he's having a phenomenal spring training. So you're like, okay, again, no, you don't get overexcited. No, they're not World Series bound, but all the guys who needed to come to spring and play well and show something of themselves have been doing that so far. I can't think of anybody. There's only one guy, and honestly, you don't run away with this too far, but Nolan Jones, who didn't have a great year last year, was hurt a lot, big sophomore slump looking numbers, only hit 3 home runs after cracking 25 in like a couple of months the year prior. Right? Nolan Jones is the only guy on the roster who is a lot of strikeouts this spring, and you go, okay, he's not trending in the right direction of the players who were, less than 2 or 3 years experience in the bigs. Everybody else is going the right way. And so you're like, well, it doesn't mean anything, but you'd prefer that than not.
Right.
If we're all over, it would be better.
Yeah, if I were to have it my way.
Yeah, right. Oh,
what is maybe just with that, because last year when we talked to Nolan Jones, I mean, it was, even some of the national narratives were like he has star potential, and for a team with without that, really, since the departure of Trevor Story, Nolan Arenado, et cetera, and Charlie Blackmon now, he is a 5-tool guy, right? As speed, tremendous defense, fantastic arm, can hit for power. And so I think for a team, especially like in the Rockies position, as they're really kind of looking up the hill at the Dodgers, et cetera. You think maybe they would slow play it, like allow him to work through it, and thinking, this is probably as good as we're going to get of an athlete and potential out here. At least from my perspective, when you have a guy like Zach Veen, who I think plays the game in a way that this team also needs, right? Like you said, his pants are on fire everywhere. His tenacity, he's running hard and on defense. He's swiping bags. He's pumping his chest. Maybe don't watch a fly ball that you think is going to be a home run and then it's not. However, he still did take second base on it. So it goes to show a little bit like when you're that guy, like, you know what, you still got a double. So and with what I think we've all thought of him and what his tools were when they drafted him, 9th overall in 2020. And then you have Fernandez, et cetera. Like you have guys who are playing well, who are a part of your future, who are younger. And then you add that with, Britton Doyle's like just phenomenal turnaround. You and I were talking about how excited we're about the defense. And if he just becomes an average hitter, which over the last few months of 23 he did. Last year, obviously, figured it out, and is only 26. Hopefully he's in center for the next 7 years at least. So it's I'm saying all that because you'd think this team would, just kind of like be happy that you got someone of Nolan Jones' capability, but is he in danger of really, you got Jordan Beck, who we talked about, like versatile high draft pick. You got the 2 young cats who I just referred to, and you got Doyle. All of those guys are, even with Nolan Jones, are all under 26. It's like a good problem to have in the outfield. I know there's some more depth. Is Nolan Jones not only like he's got to kind of figure it out, not trending in the right direction, but do you think there's some real danger in and his outlook for this team when you got some of those really young guys producing at a better clip, and will be on the hook or arbitration eligible for longer, all that good stuff. Should Nolan Jones, if he continues to struggle, is it realistic that hook will come or could come when maybe we assume that you kind of let him play it out, let him figure it out. You really want to kind of invest in his star potential. But with the other guys on the roster, maybe those guys have star potential.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. And it's one that I think just timing wise, unless Nolan really continues to struggle throughout the spring. And I will say he started to come around a little bit. He still hasn't launched one, but he's hitting a couple of singles. It's not it's like, okay. And Veen or somebody goes nuts. I still think because Nolan does have the big league experience, is a little bit older, and also just frankly because he's out of options. So you need to be sure if you're, because I don't know that shopping him right now for a trade based on what he did the previous year, people are going to want to see, can he get it back? And so the Rockies have every incentive, whether it's to keep him long-term as a future superstar for you, or if it does turn out that you've got 5 superstar outfielders on your roster with Nolan Jones, Brenton Doyle, I think is a star outfielder. I think we're comfortable with that, right? Jones was a star outfielder for one season. If he can get back to that, well, now you've got 2 of them, and you've got Jordan Beck, Zach Veen, Yankiel Fernandez, eventually probably Benny Montgomery, Cole Carrig, and let's not forget last year's #1 draft pick and a guy who's been in the top 10 in a lot of lists, Charlie Condon, who some people see as a third.
And Billy Montgomery, who was a first-round pick. 3.
Yeah. So you've got an extraordinary amount of talent. And I do think at some point one of those guys is going to need to get traded, and because you're the Rockies, traded for pitching, because that's just a smart way to do it. But I don't know which one it will be, and I'm not sure that they know which one it will be. And that, I think, goes back to your phrase, Nick, about like let it play out, I think is what you're saying, right? You've got to let him, unless you're just so, if he has such a terrible spring training, you go, man, the guy just lost it, then maybe you got to make some decisions. But I think to some extent you got to give him a month or 2, and that really works out for the timetable of these younger players as well. As exciting as it is to see them do this, and as much it'll kind of feel like a big old fart soundy deflaty balloon with, you get to the end of spring and Zach Veen's hitting 400 and then he goes back to AAA. You're like, come on, man. What the heck? But he can show up in a month. Veen's also got to prove that he can be healthy. Veen's problem has never been production. When the guy's on the field, the numbers are ridiculous, but he has it. That's one of the things that comes with playing the game the way he does, is he's gotten hurt a lot too. So, if you trade or even worse, cut Nolan Jones to make way for Zach Veen, and then a month and a half from now, Veen's out for the season, oops. So, yeah.
Which he has been, he's had some injury issues already. Yeah. So I love it. I think your perspective, I think, is very much in line with mine. One, Nolan Jones doesn't cost a ton right now.
Right.
Nor do any of the other guys. So you don't really benefit from just, kind of turning the page or playing all that good stuff, especially when you're trying to figure out who is the core that's going to be here. Because like you said, at some point they will need to make a decision, and that decision will be pretty impactful because you are trading someone that is well thought of in baseball, one of these prospects for pitching. And ideally, Nolan Jones right now, the stock probably isn't very high. So what you would get back, or any return, if there were some, wouldn't be worth it. Because really you want to try and be able to get some really high potential arms in return. And so you really kind of need him to play up a little bit, even if you really like the direction the other guys give you, or the, maybe their outlook. The Rockies hopefully are invested in him turning it around, so that you have the option of wheeling and dealing. So I'm excited for it. I think Nolan, I think he'll bounce back. If there's ever a stadium or a field that can help you get turned around, it's Coors Field. That's for sure. And good news, at least he didn't forget how to play defense. So
no, he laid out for one the other day. Guys,
yeah. And he's a plus athlete, and that's a big outfield. You feel really good about him in left, and Doyle in center, and those are two of the biggest. Yeah, that's the biggest space, in sport. I don't even know sports.
Yeah,
I don't know. Cricket might be bigger. Anyway,
cricket.
But with that, let's transition a little bit to the elephant in the lineup.
Oh,
so
sure.
There is one guy that gets paid a significant amount more than anyone else on the roster. I think he has played a combined 60 games in 2 years,
17
maybe
games in the last 2 years. Yeah.
So Chris Bryant, and it's hard to even, in my opinion, it is hard for me to go into a conversation with you and try and drum up the optimism of Chris Bryant playing well, like what it would do for the team. Chris Bryant's always been, when he plays well, the team that he's on wins. And so even 2 years ago when he played, the Rockies were a 500 or a little bit above, I think, in the games that he played.
Yeah.
And so he's an impactful player, at least historically has been an impactful player. With where we're at now, I think degenerative back issue, which I've never heard anyone going from having a bad back to not having a bad back. But if not, right, it's really a waste of resources. He's got to get that money the way the baseball contracts are set up. No one's going to trade for Chris Bryant, and unless you're going to eat a ton of the money like you did with Nolan, which, to be honest, it's probably better he's here than whatever you might get for him anyhow. Right. But what have you seen? I know we kind of talked about it beforehand, and then I'll let JT too, if there's some questions to pop in about Chris Bryant. What have you seen from the spring? Anything to highlight before we bash his eventual injury?
You're right. The conversation around Chris Bryant is really difficult because we've been stuck in the same conversation for going on year 3 now in a lot of ways, right? And so I have, at this time in each of the last 2 years, as you've noted, been the guy who does come out and say, hey, look, there is always a possibility. I'm not telling you Bryant's going to be an all-star. I think I might have predicted last year that he was going to be an all-star. Not like, it was a bold prediction or whatever, right? Because look, man, there are not a lot of people walking around on the face of the earth that have as much baseball talent as Chris Bryant. There just are not. The guys are rookie.
I think people underestimate how good he is at baseball.
Right.
And, it's
even at times when he wasn't at his best, even at times when he was hurt. Now, obviously, the numbers are what they are. It's been awful. And it has been injury related. And I agree with you. There's when the season ended last year, my thoughts on Chris Bryant were, okay, he's just going to sort of be around from now on. And the one thing about it, I think he gets a little bit of a misnomer because people are like, because he is making a lot of money, so they're not going to cut him. They're not going to send him away. And people are like, well, he's taking up a spot for, some of these young guys who could be playing. But no, he's not. In order to take up a roster spot, you got to be on the roster. And so, not to make look, he hasn't been blocking anybody because he hasn't been on the roster for much of the time.
Right.
And that's super frustrating. If you do want to get in, I did see StatCast did this really interesting article recently with 10 numbers out of StatCast that were most interesting. And their number one was that Chris Bryant's swing velocity is up 10 miles an hour back to basically where it was when he was with the Cubs. It's been down with the Rockies. Anyone who watches his bat speed has noticed that. It's one of the reasons why at first when he was struggling, it was like his batting average was actually still pretty good. There was just no power. He famously didn't hit a home run at Coors Field till August of his first year or something. Like, what? So yes, if after everything I'm about to say, you go, yeah, I still think he's going to be hurting terrible this year, I will say, okay, fine. But he does look healthy this spring. His bat speed is much better. And I don't think the Rockies have any disillusions anymore that this guy can play in the field every day or even most of the time. Charlie Blackmon's not on the roster anymore, which totally opens up the DH position. So you stick him there. And if you can stay healthy, and if that bat speed does come back, you might just have something in the middle of your lineup that almost nobody was expecting you to have, which is a really savvy veteran hitter.
Yeah. Having the velocity up to, I mean, because vintage Chris Bryant, because he has such a compact swing, the ball would jump. And I think sometimes when you're watching his, especially on TV, when you watch his swing, it's so compact into the ball, not exaggerated follow through. It doesn't look like he gets a hold of it maybe the way that
right. You almost go, how did
it does in person.
Out? Yeah.
And so hearing that the ball is coming off, 10 miles an hour is pretty significant. It's like JT going from the 1 mile an hour that he runs now to 11. That's a significant,
that's a 10 mile an
hour. But I also think, I look at it from, there's a ton of rotation, right? There's a ton of torque that you put on your hips and your back when you swing a baseball bat.
That is true.
If you have a back issue, it is very hard to turn around on a 95 mile an hour fastball. Mm-hmm. So to hear that that's happening in the spring, I think even gives me a little bit more encouragement of, he's not just putting the bat on the ball. He's hitting with authority, and he's turning through the ball at and that probably hopefully means he feels well. I'm excited for what he can do as a DH. I think I agree with you, though. I think he's a capable fielder. There's no point in playing him in the field. They have tremendous fielders already. Right. And the wear and tear that you get putting him in right field. Why? You got guys who are adequate fielders, younger guys who can kind of take that brunt. I think Taglia has been a tremendous revelation at playing at first and the power they bring. So you don't need him there. Ryan McMahon is one of the best fielders in baseball.
Right.
So in the end, it's like you really just need him to hit and to be a consistent enough presence in the dugout that it rubs off on you can't lead from the training room. And so I'm hopeful, I'm not banking on it. It's a little bit of like, I'm not going to go throw down money on the over games played for Chris Bryant. That said, every game that he plays it's a benefit for the squad. Either way they're paying him. And like you said, if he's hurt, he's not going to take up a spot from someone. And usually when he's healthy enough to be on the field, he plays pretty well. Yeah. So there are worse things. I will hit though the full bottom out of the Chris Bryant experience. Like if we get another one of the last 2 years again this year, I know in baseball it's hard to kind of you're not going to unload that, but yeah, it's like 3 years
done with it.
Shame on me. I don't know how many times you have to get shamed on before like you're just all right, no more shame. Moving on. So I'll wait and see, but I'm going to take your optimism and I'm going to take your stat there about his velocity, swing velocity, and I'm going to take it as a good sign.
Yeah. Why not? It's that time of year.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of pull up and kind of pick off something that the doc had said earlier about Rockies' plan coming to fruition. I wanted to kind of ask you about that a little bit because I think I said before we started the pod, like, I'm a casual observer. I pay attention to what's going on around the team. Watch like as many games as I'd like to. So I kind of want to ask you what you think that plan is at this point in time, and if you think that it's coming to fruition as well. Because I think from an outside, fan perspective, visual fan perspective, looking, there's a lot of young roster, but I think you see in a lot of sports teams that run out a lot of young talent, be a little bit directionless, can be a little bit inconsistent. Not to say that we're expecting the Rockies to go on a playoff run necessarily, but what do you think the vision is for this year for the Rockies and kind of how they plan on developing guys and making and being competitive, or at least attempting to be competitive while doing so?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the Rockies very quietly, in fact, so quietly that they have adamantly denied that they ever did it, made a huge shift in philosophy after really once the Chris Bryant thing wasn't working out. After that trade, sometime during that process, they realized, hey, look, what we thought we could do, which was in the departure of Nolan Arenado, they thought they could flip that offensive production into somebody else, Chris Bryant. The starting rotation had been the secret heroes of that team, as much as we do think of the 17 and 18 squad as the Nolan, Charlie, Trevor, DJ LeMahieu teams. Those guys had actually already been on the team in 13, 14, and 15 and 16. Right. So why weren't they going to the postseason? Because what they didn't have was John Gray, Armand Marquez, Antonio Senzatella, these guys who, and Tyler Anderson, people forget kind of how good he was for that 2018 team. Those guys, as much as they're not superstar names, were the difference makers. And they actually had some really good bullpens those years too. Yep. Greg Holland had a phenomenal return season out of nowhere, stuff like that. And so what the Rockies, I think, what they saw was actually our pitching. The public might not know it, but we still have Marquez, Freeland. I can't believe I forgot to mention Kyle Freeland a second ago. Yeah. Marquez, Freeland, Senzatella. They lost Gray, which I think was their biggest, dumbest mistake during all of this, honestly, because they lost him for nothing. But they thought our starting rotation is still strong enough that if we just replace Nolan's offense, you were never going to replace his defense. Although oddly enough, with McMahon, somehow they got close. The universe is hilarious. Yeah. But I could kind of understand their logic of why they could roll that forward. But I think at some point they realized that's just not going to work. And they were going to have to tear a lot of things down, send some pieces off, and build toward a youth movement of all these guys coming up through their draft and do it the way they did in 17 and 18. Like I said, first that group of position players arrived. Nolan, Charlie, DJ was traded for, but he still was in their system. He came up through their system, all that. Even guys like Ryan McMahon, David Dahl, who got there later. But the pitching has been what they've really focused on in the drafts and growing that over the last couple of years. And that's where you see Chase Dollander coming in now, putting up some really fascinating numbers. Guys like Carson Palmquist and Sean Sullivan. And we've seen a lot of Zach Agnos this spring training, which has made me happy, not just because he has a phenomenal mustache, but those are going to be the guys who really are going to have to do the thing. So, as far as the plan moving forward, I think they've been in a rebuild for 2 years. They won't use that word. They won't admit it. And they haven't done certain things that you would think in certain ways would be like trading Ryan McMahon. Last year, a lot of people thought Ryan McMahon was going to get traded because if you're in a rebuild, that's the kind of thing you do.
Right.
Yeah. I think that particular case is a little bit different. It's a little bit more like a Charlie Blackmon type of case, but where I think Ryan McMahon's just going to be their guy for a long time. I also don't think he had the kind of value around the league that, quite frankly, a lot of Rockies fans think that he does, because he's a league average bat who's a great defender, but there's just not a lot of teams at the deadline who were a great defensive third baseman away from going to the World Series. That's not who gets moved at the deadline. And so I think the idea has been, let's get, like we were just talking about earlier, who are the core, or even just who are the position guys? McMahon's going to be your stalwart, Charlie Blackmon style veteran who does the thing, shows up every day. One thing Ryan McMahon never gets enough credit for, by the way, is he plays 150 games, 155 games, 160 games every year. So there's your guy. There's your rock, right? You've got the exciting
3 different positions,
right,
and plays them really well. Yeah.
And can play anywhere. So you've got that guy who he's the guy the media goes to when there's been a really terrible loss, who can stand there and go, man, this sucks, but not yell and scream at you. You know,
Right.
that you need that guy. And one of the things that really soured in the last couple of years of Nolan being around was Cargo was gone and Para was gone. He didn't have that guy. After a bad loss, we'd all go talk to Nolan. And he didn't like that at all. He wasn't in the mood to talk to us. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So at least with Ryan,
Was he ever in the
McMahon,
mood to talk to media though? That no,
he wasn't terrible with me at least, but
no, yeah.
you know, so you've got McMahon. Then next to him, you've got Tovar, who they obviously signed along, and you feel great about that. So you're like, okay, our left side is about as sturdy as a bad baseball team can have on the left side, right? I agree with the good doctor about totally over. At first, you'd really love to see him take the reins there at first base, and now you feel great about those three spots. We've been talking left and center all day, and really your outfield there is a big, fun competition. They brought in Tyro Estrada at second base, which is like a veteran guy just to hang on to the spot until either Adiel Amador or somebody else figures it out. So there's your position player core, and you hope they kind of coalesce. And the next part of that plan is going to be, okay, now we introduce what we hope will be our equivalent to back in the day, the Marquez, Freeland, Gray injection of talent being Dollander, Palmquist, Sullivan, you know, and they've got a couple other interesting guys down there, Agnos. So I think that's the hope and plan, and they've been very aggressive with Dollander. There's even been hints. Patrick Saunders of the Denver Post said he might be in the opening day starting rotation, which would really surprise me. Excuse me, but that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I want to keep on that because I heard that, love Patrick, and so that perked me up. It's been a while since the Rockies have had a stud pitching prospect. You know, really Gray and Freeland, and even I don't know that Kyle came up with the same kind of juice though. I know Gray did, right, just because of the size, the power, all that stuff. Tell us a little bit about Dollander and like what I mean. Even if he doesn't break camp, it won't be long, I would assume. And so maybe just give us a profile. You know, what kind of pitcher is he? What are the pitches that he throws? What does he throw real well? Anything about his game that you think you might need to work on? And you know, just help us get some insight on hopefully who will be anchoring this rotation for the next decade.
Yeah, he's very similar to John Gray and Armand Marquez he's got a power pitcher profile, a high 90s fastball. He's comfortable throwing it at the top of the zone. He considers himself to be a power strikeout guy. Huge strikeout numbers in the minors last year. He might have been second in all of minor league baseball in terms of strikeouts. He had I think 4 or 5 games in a row where he had 10 or more strikeouts. So he works with that high fastball. When he throws it at the bottom of the zone, it can have some good sink and tail to it, which you like. You see a lot of that out of Marquez as well. And then, of course, the same thing that both those guys have, different shape to it, is the slider. The wipeout slider he has the same out pitch as Marquez and John Gray. At this point, I would say his slider is better than either of those guys were in the minor leagues. Dollander's slider is, at least in terms of its shape, its movement, it's, you know, his location. He's still working on location. He's a young guy, and I do think, you know, the command control, like with a lot of these power pitchers, tends to be what comes along a little bit later. When you're throwing the ball that hard with that much movement, putting it right where you want is a little more difficult. But boy, he and again, it was like February 28th or something, and so Matt Chapman, you know, and some of these guys he was throwing against, but it was his first taste of big league competition. I'm watching Matt Chapman, who's a very good major league hitter, just swinging at the slider going, what in the heck was that? Just what in the world was that? And so, yeah, I mean, he's got the stuff. I think Dollander is, and I covered both Marquez and Gray as prospects. I actually watched John Gray's professional debut in Grand Junction and interviewed him immediately after. And I was always I still am a big John Gray guy. Quite frankly, I love John Gray.
Yeah.
Like as a human being, like he's awesome. and I was happier for him when Texas won the World Series than anybody else involved with the whole situation. Like I was so happy for John Gray. But I think with Dollander, what they have is essentially potentially a better version of John Gray. And that's pretty exciting because, again, I don't know how much the casual fan or the national audience understands. Like that 2017 team doesn't make the postseason without John Gray. They don't come close to it. He was the best pitcher in the National League in the second half. And like after the All-Star break, the Rockies were maybe kind of in it, but there have been lots of years where halfway through the season, they're maybe kind of in it. And by the end of the year, they're in last place again. He was the best pitcher in the second half of 2017 in the National League. And I know he pitched so poorly in that wild card game in Arizona. But I think it's either he or Marquez is still the number one strikeout per 9 inning guy in franchise history. Like Gray had like a 3.20 ERA at Coors Field in his career. That was the thing that really bothered me the most when they let him go, was like, this is one of him and Jorge De La Rosa are the only people who've ever figured out how to pitch at this park.
Sure. And he wants to stay here.
And he wanted to stay. Still baffled by that move. But you hope you can create. And so I guess the end part, back to JT's question about the plan. So I've actually been saying this to a lot of people because I actually do think this is all going to come together very similarly to how it did in 17 and 18. But what happened was they screwed that all up real bad, didn't they? They made terrible free agent signings. They didn't keep guys like DJ LeMahieu. They let it all fall apart. Yeah. And so what you hope is that if it does start to come together this time, they build better, longer lasting relationships with guys like Chase Dollander and Brenton Doyle and Jordan Beck or Nolan Jones is the guy or whoever. And you're signing these guys for good contracts, long-term, you're keeping them around and you're not alienating them so that 2 years into their contract, they're like, I want out of here, man. This sucks.
Yeah. Let's not do that. I guess the good news about continuity is they have been through it together, meaning the front office, and maybe going through it, making an intentional effort to like what we did before wasn't it. Always the worry is, is there going to be accountability? I would love to work for Dick Monfort. The loyalty that he has for his guys. I mean, it's not a bad trait, to be honest with you. I mean, especially in sports, you don't see loyalty very much. That said, to a fault a little bit. So one, I really hope, and I think that they can, and I think that they will, because, 5 of the top 10 prospects for the Rockies are pitchers, which it's been a while. And then even on the outside of that, you have your Vargas, you have Gabe Hughes, you have some guys even outside of that top 10 that really look like they can be guys. And so like you said, it's really, are they not only is this thing going to come together at some point, but are you prepared to capitalize on it? That's one of the big issues that I've had, because you see how teams with even less resources, Tampa Bay, Kansas City, not lately the A's, but in yesteryear, they were teams that have made World Series runs with a third of the Rockies payroll.
Sure. Even the Rangers and Diamondbacks of a couple of years ago, right?
Yes. Yep. Those were teams, especially that Diamondback team.
I know. Those guys are
and it wasn't a bunch of Kansas City last year making it to the postseason. It essentially was Bobby Witt Jr. and a bunch of old vets on 1-year deals and then young stud pitching. And so the framework is out there. I hope, since they're not going to go hire someone from one of those organizations that knows how to use less and get more, that they're at least adopting some of that philosophy and really getting ahead of guys. So the Zeke Tovar, right? I think that they signed him to an extension last year, right? And so you see it in motion a little bit, right? You show us the glimpse of being able to be that guy. You got the right makeup. Let's get you locked and happy, and then let's move on to the next. So again, like I said, I'm entering the season with some hope. I think they're going to find out whether or not they have some guys. And to Montford's credit, the guy does spend money, and so he's not cheap. The team, how they run it versus how much they'll spend, two totally different things. And so, do you think realistic timetable, considering all of the stuff that we've talked about, the Rockies' potential in the minor leagues, the front office's track record, whether it's making good deals to get Nolan Jones or making some bad ones like Chris Brown. Also, if you got to pick, you know what? I think that the 2017, 2018 style window will happen. So we're going to operate under the assumption that it'll happen. When do you think the 2016 season would be, right? So that was when I think you really recognize that those guys were dudes, and you started to get a little bit of the taste of some quality pitching. Young guys who don't care about pitching it out to because they don't know any better. Right. A little bit of that brashness. So when do you think that the 2016, so the kind of run-up year, when do you think that would hit in your estimation? If you were to say, hey, that window's going to happen, here's going to be the catapult or the igniter, and then we'll get the good run right after.
All right, here's the fun part for you. Here's where I get to do the fun. We can have some spring training fun right now. And I'm not just saying this, and I know what my reputation is, so let me have it if you got to. I think that's the year we're about to have. I think 2025 is your 2016 equivalent, right? At the beginning of 16, Trevor Story was the guy who had the incredible spring training, was coming off of the Troy Tulowitzki trade. People weren't sure what they were going to do at short because Jose Reyes had gotten in very serious trouble that offseason, and so everything was kind of weird. It was not a foregone conclusion that Story was going to be the opening day shortstop. The pitching was still in shambles, but they did have Arenado had become a superstar by that point. Blackman was becoming a superstar before our eyes, and so they were like, well, let's at least have some fun position players, I guess, right? And so they ran it, and that was the buildup, like you said. And then that team kind of fell apart late. Like they had Mark Reynolds, I remember that at first base. He got hurt late in the season, but they actually hung in there decently in 16 until everybody got hurt, like one weekend in Philly. And it was just like, well, because they had no depth, right?
Yep.
When you have no depth, two or three key pieces go down, and now you're not a very good baseball team anymore. And that's kind of where they are this year. That's why you can't, because you were talking about like something they could lose 100 games again, but I think only if they have some bad injuries like that. I just don't think they're going to be that bad, and they are going to have a lot of this talent to inject, but it's early. I mean, so much depends upon, for you poet fans out there, so much depends upon guys who've never thrown a single pitch in Major League Baseball before. And so I can't be like, well, they're going to make the team better. But I wrote I can't remember how long ago this was, but I wrote an article looking back at like the 2016 opening day starting rotation and then the 2018 opening day starting rotation is like none of the same guys. And when you change out your entire rotation like that, it changes the fortunes of your ball club one way or the other. And so, yeah, I do think this year is going to be full of exciting stuff like Jordan Beck or Zach Veen or Yanquiel Fernandez or these young guys all battling, maybe breaking out, maybe taking that next step. You hope the pitchers are making their debuts. It was kind of quiet in 2016, but like Marquez made his debut out of the bullpen, which was interesting. John Gray made his debut near the end of 16, and neither did anything particularly, mind-blowing or eye-grabbing at the time, but it was just like, let's get them some whatever. Freeland would make his debut on opening day the next year of 2017, and then they were kind of off to the races with all of that against the Dodgers. That was one of the coolest games I've gotten to cover. So I think this year is going to be something where maybe they're even at 500 halfway through the year. People are like, man, should they be buyers at the deadline? It's like, no, calm, everyone stay calm, hold. was that Mel Gibson and Braveheart. Hold, wait, let these guys really show what they can do, because I do think they have the chance to be competing for the postseason as early as next year. Of course, you need most of these pitchers to work out. But I don't know, why not? It's spring. I think they're gonna. So let's go.
Let's go. Yeah. I mean, and another member of that team that's part of this team, Antonio Sensatella, really kind of burst on the scene in 2017. I think he was like 10-5.
Yeah.
Was just an innings guy, right? Like, wasn't scared. He's going to take the ball. Not a tremendous ERA, competitive, kept you in games. Hence why, he had 10 wins against 5 losses. And I think the good part is there's still some connection to how that happened with Marquez, with Freeland, and Sensatella, to be able to remember what winning looked like. Because in the end, you can't have a winning culture if you don't win. And so having some of the guys that have been on the team, have seen it come through, that can really provide that reflection for the guys in the dugout, I think is super exciting. And I actually concur. I think that this year, I think it's going to be one of those where they hang in through the All-Star break. And, especially with the expanded playoff format, I'm not going to say that they're going to go to the postseason. That said, I also wouldn't be shocked if they surprise some guys. I think if, Nylander is able to come up any one of those top 10 prospects that we talked about, most of those guys aren't even on, the projected 26-man roster. If any of those guys, which can happen, right? Again, if they're young enough to not know that they should be scared of pitching at altitude, you'd be surprised how much success you can have.
Yeah.
And
nobody was expecting, your point, nobody expected Sensatella back in 17, like you were talking about it. He was not John Gray, Eddie Butler. Remember Eddie Butler, Tyler Anderson.
Yeah, my guy. But he wasn't on the radar for any of us.
No,
really. Like,
he just kind of came up and he pitched that opening series and he won. And like I said, he was the first pitcher in MLB that year to get to 10 wins. And he was 22. He'd never pitched in AAA. Yep. No one expected him to be there. Now, so again, you don't throw those kinds of expectations onto Dollander, who has much higher prospect, or like that'd be like if Sean Sullivan made the roster and then won his first 10 games. You like, okay, that would be a huge surprise, but we know and have experienced that things like that do happen. And that's how you go from, in 17, nobody, even I, who had been watching those prospects as close as possible, I still thought they were one more year away. And in 17, they were just like, how about we do it now? Like,
yeah. What do you say? Tell us.
Yeah.
And because I think that there are more physically gifted, again, guys on that. So I think if any of them have the mental fortitude, I think that's what separated Sensatella from other pitchers. Was like, guy's a bulldog. You hear about that sometimes, about like, you just got to have a guy that's going to go out there and compete every day. So his stats aren't necessarily, but he gives you 6 strong innings. If you've scored 5, he keeps them to 4. If you scored 6, he keeps them to 5. And I think some of that gets lost a little bit in where this team's at. For me, Drew, maybe kind of a last grouping of stuff, it hinges on the bullpen. And I think we've seen it too many times, even over the last couple of years, where, there are a ton of games that this team had put themselves in position to win. And then, it's 5-3 going into the 8th. And then all of a sudden it's 10-5 going into the 9th. And so what's your thoughts maybe on just the makings of the bullpen? And then, do you agree that really, I actually feel pretty good about their starting pitching? I feel pretty good about their position players. I feel really good about their defense and being able to really limit what the other teams are going to be able to get. They're going to make folks earn it. I think it hinges on the bullpen. I don't know if I saw or feel confident about what the plan was to have a good bullpen. I don't want to even say adequate, like have a good bullpen. And in doing so, especially now in today's pitching market where guys don't pitch 7, 8, 9 innings, they pitch 5, 6 innings. So you need more guys to be able to get you through. How do you feel about the dugout? The bullpen? Is there more hope there? Is there something that I'm maybe missing with your with your depth of knowledge, or are we screwed?
I was going to say, Doc, we were having so much fun. This is what you wanted. This is what you
I mean, it's so much fun. Going on.
We were having a good time.
Way to go. Way to go.
The best thing, I'll say two things before I get into the specifics. But one, it can't get much worse, can it? And two, bullpens are so volatile that sometimes dudes just show up. I will say they've got some guys I really like. Victor Vodnik and Seth Halverson are two young players who can throw 178 miles an hour. And, you're just like, geez, look out. And both have, I think, a lot of potential. And Vodnik was kind of forced. Again, Victor Vodnik last year wasn't great in spring training and wasn't expected to make the team. And it was kind of a surprise that he even did. Even after the spring he had, it was like, oh, okay, buddy or somebody must have seen something in this guy because they're going to carry him. And I was like, I assume he has a bad start here or there. He was going to be taxi squad guy. There's almost always Carlos Estevez for a couple of years. The Rockies would send him back and forth to AAA and up and down. But Vodnik just pitched so well that not only did he never get sit down to AAA, he ended up taking over the closer's role by the end of the year. And then he kind of struggled with it a little bit. But like, well, the guy wasn't even supposed to be here today. And now he's the closer of the team. And so you're like, so they've got some guys. They've got some dudes. The best news about the bullpen is that there's nobody there who's making any money or has any kind of veteran status who it's like you're tied to him, like the Brian Shaws or the Wade Davises, where like gotta keep sending them out there or paying them $12 million. Like at least with these guys, there's just kind of an open competition. That said, I do kind of think this will be the thing that is most likely to stop them from going on some kind of magical run, because there's just a ton of unproven guys in the bullpen. And at Coors Field, as you mentioned, it can happen anywhere, but just especially at Coors, it takes one or two bits of bad luck and an entire bullpen can implode. And God, if that happens on day one of a long homestand, just, it can become a big problem quickly. So, but there's always room for hope again, because there are young pitchers. They've got a few guys. Jaden Hill, I'm curious to see if he can do some things. They brought in a veteran in Diego Castilla. He hasn't been good in a couple of years, but maybe he'll get it back. You don't know, but I kind of worry about that spot. I look at the names and I go, you usually like to have at least two relievers. You go, those guys are going to be solid. Let's have these young fireballers kind of fight it. And there's just not guys you look at. Like Vodnik could be one of the better relievers in baseball this year, or he could be in AAA in 2 months. So I don't know,
Yeah. Again, there's no proven. You might be able to strike some fire in a match, but we'll see. Sorry, JT.
Yeah. No, you're good. Was going to ask you just real quick, kind of maybe our last question, and then we'll start wrapping. But maybe one or two guys just to kind of look at early on, in that more casual Rockies fans maybe don't know, or maybe they've come onto the team as an acquisition, or a guy that expected to have a breakthrough moment this season. Anyone come to mind?
We touched on Tolia a little bit, but didn't really get into it. And at first base, the Rockies really do have a fascinating player here. He's a switch hitter. He's listed at 6'5". Every time I talk to him, I feel like he's 6'8". I'm 6'2". And so like, there aren't a lot of guys who just tower over me. And Tolia is massive. He hits from both sides of the plate, but for a guy that size, he's very quick. He's worked a lot with Todd Helton on defense around the bag at first. Scouts have long said he's got Gold Glove caliber potential there at first base, and that's just the kind of guy. So it's very soft hands. He's really good at first, but he is also one of these huge power and huge strikeout guys. Yeah. So what are you going to get out of him? Again, there's a huge difference between a guy who, is Joey Gallo near the end of his productive days, where he's batting $190, but still hitting 35 home runs. Yeah. It's either strikeout, walk, or home run, like the true three outcomes player, right?
Yeah.
And Tolia can be that at times. But he did, like, his first stint in the bigs is like 35% strikeout rate. But then he got it down to 30. It's like, if he can bring that down to 28, 27, that's still high. But for a guy with his power, there's a huge difference between hitting 220 even or 230 with 35 to 40 home runs and Gold Glove caliber defense at first. And now all of a sudden you've got this guy who, along with, you know, the Tovars and Doyles of the world, is really something to get excited about. And not somebody that I think had that same kind of prospect sheen on him that these other guys did. So I think, you know, especially in terms of his, if you want to get nerdy about baseball, the Statcast numbers, his exit velos, those kinds of things, he's a great guy to watch because the Statcast people love him and they're just convinced he's going to hit 40 bombs this year and strike out 200 times. But, you know, that's the modern game. Yeah.
You know, not everyone can be a contact hitter. I'm going to ask about one more player. Tell me about Jeffrey Yan. And,
okay.
The awesomeness that is that man.
That's right.
You lit up when he said that.
Well, yes, right. I hope he makes the team, man. I had a buddy of mine who doesn't follow the Rockies as closely. So anyone listening doesn't know. Jeffrey Yan is a left-handed pitcher out of the Dominican, I want to say. I hope I didn't get that wrong. And when he did this on the Independence League, when he gets a big strikeout, he jumps up into the air and comes down and does the splits, like all in one moment. He went viral last year doing this, and I was not expecting the Rockies to pick him up. He seems like, in many ways, the least Rockies player, like, the least Trevor Story, Charlie Blackmon, Todd Helton dude. I mean, these are very buttoned up. Nolan Arenado, those very serious guys. Not a lot of joking around with those dudes. And this guy, when so I'm fully enamored with it, right? He strikes the guy out, he jumps up in the air, does it. I didn't realize he would do it even if there was somebody on base. I saw him do it with a guy on second base, and I was like, I'm with you. I like the energy. Let's maybe not be doing the splits when a guy can take third. I mean, and he does have the Rockies didn't just bring him in because he jumps up and does the splits, right? He's got a good, and they need a lefty. They need a couple of lefties. Lucas Gilbreth looks like his. I feel so bad for that guy. Colorado native. He just can't get healthy. Really good lefty reliever who they just haven't had for a while. So if Jeffrey Yan is the guy, I'll be excited about it. It'll give something for the people at Coors Field to have some fun with. I think he's a long shot. I think you're probably likely to see him start the year in AAA or whatever, but it's so fun to see guys like that bring some joy and exuberance to the game. Like, I was raised in that generation that was very buttoned up about baseball, and you hit a home run and you tip your cap and you jog around the bases with your head down and you act like you've done it before, even as a kid, you know, and so I get that. And I understand and respect if that's how you want to play the game too. But I love that, like, that's not everyone's life. That's not everyone's experience. That's not everyone's culture. And that's not everyone, just any individual. And that this guy is his full-on self out there on the diamond. I am rooting. I don't say this, and it's not something I'm technically supposed to do. But I am rooting for that young man. I don't know how you couldn't be. I love it.
Yeah. It was, it was nice, and it was nice for it to be a Rocky. I would have loved it on any other team. I agree with you. I very much subscribe to the act like you've been there before, but love the fact that, like, guys care, like, and they're having fun. And you know what? It's supposed to be a game. He throws hard enough that it's like, if you can locate a little bit, you give him a shot. But I agree. I think it's a long shot, but I think that we'll see him. You can't have enough. You can't have enough relievers with injuries, all that stuff. I would bet on, he'll get a look, and hopefully he turns that into an opportunity. But wanted to get your take on.
I just want to see a full stadium crowd react to it.
Yeah.
I want to see the people, especially anyone who came to the ballpark and didn't know. Right?
Yeah.
He just doesn't.
Especially if it's like 7th inning, 2 outs. they do a good job of getting that one like ready to go. Oh man, it was
one ball game. You're like, what?
Must see.
I love it. Well, Drew, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time. Wanted to give you a moment just to talk about a documentary that you wrote, when Colorado went prime time, a YouTube documentary that you have out there. You might want to plug that.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate it. Had the chance to do this over at Mile High Sports. Was a lot of fun. It just kind of arose out of, watching the Buffs play. And I'm Colorado native. I've always paid close attention to Colorado sports. And I'm just thinking it's kind of wild that like the last time the Buffs were like consistently good was when Dion was playing. And then it just sort of reminded me of that era, which essentially lines up with the 90s. Dion made his debut in '89 for both football and baseball. Remember, he's drafted by the Yankees, came up with the Yankees first. And then I just started thinking about it, and I found all of these weird random coincidences, which, by the way, I know are coincidences. I present in the documentary almost as if there's some like magical correlation between the fact that Deion Sanders was doing awesome things and cool things were happening in Colorado sports. Like we get a baseball team and a hockey team during that decade.
Right.
The Broncos win back-to-back championships. You've got the Dikembe Mutombo moment, all these really cool things going on in Colorado sports, and Dion being Dion and playing two sports at the same time. So I kind of just wanted to celebrate all these things, but then I would find so many weird random connections and coincidence. Like the Yankees also drafted John Elway at the very beginning of the 80s. So in the 80s, the Yankees drafted John Elway and Deion Sanders, which is a really interesting random connection. And so there would be stuff like that. And then he's now come back to coach in Colorado. And after all these years, the vibes, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the vibes in Colorado sports, even with the Rockies being out, the Avs and Nuggets are championship caliber. Finally, the Broncos are back to being relevant again. And hey, is it because Coach Prime is up there in Boulder at Folsom Field? No, but the fact that the Buffs are better is, but everything else is coincidental, right? But it's kind of interesting how these eras of Colorado sports being rad and fun and cool line up with Deion Sanders for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's
I was a huge Dion fan. I'm stoked to go check it out.
Right on.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Checking it out. Thank you again, Drew, and Doc. Thank you. Everyone, we appreciate you tuning in with us today. We're going to call it an evening, but we'll be back next week talking local sports teams. Till then, be safe. We appreciate you. And if you need a sports prescription, ask a doctor.
Gotcha.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle.